Remember the 5th of November. The gunpowder treason and plot.
When the George W. Bush administration declared a general crusade against terrorism after the attacks on New York City in 2001, life in the United States changed drastically as the Department of Homeland Security was created and institutionalized Big Brother surveillance strategies under the auspices of public safety. Suddenly, there was mortal danger everywhere, and the Patriot Act was passed as quickly as possible, creating unprecedented powers to spy on and interfere with U.S. citizens. If you weren't a U.S. citizen, you could be waterboarded and tortured at Guantanamo Bay. Told that we were hated not because of our international policy decisions, but because of our freedoms. Many of those freedoms needed to be infringed upon or taken away until the bad guys were caught and punished. Critique or opposition to the government's actions was considered unhelpful, unpatriotic, or possibly treasonous. It was said by some,
"Hey, all you un-American bastards! If you don't like America, why don't you get out?"
Hello, I'm your Screen Jockey, Justin Neal. Today, I'm going to talk about a subversive, controversial political revenge thriller that was released at another time I can remember when Homeland Fear ruled the headlines. A movie created to remind us that the best way to control a population is to frighten them. V for Vendetta takes place in a near-future, government-sanctioned police state where minorities and their activist groups are not just litigated against, but actively disposed of, and in one facility, experimented on. For the majority, it's more of comfortable oppression, where it's so much easier not to say anything and just avoid the hassle. It's a movie about what can happen to a democratic society that gets too complacent. If it sits on the couch and trades freedom for safety.
I know why you did it. I know you were afraid. Who wouldn't be?
Pulls no punches in its satire against authoritarianism, against oppression, against the general move that you might say this 21st century is taking in so-called civilized countries against gay rights, against religious freedom, against the other, against outsiders.
It challenged concepts that people had set ideas about and made them reconsider issues they'd previously held inviolable, which I found profoundly relevant to what had been going on. The major one being this: the biggest difference between a freedom fighter and a terrorist is your point of view.
A certain point of view?
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
A movie where style confronts substance and they grapple head-on, with neither one subjugating the other. A movie about fear and fearlessness, because in a totalitarian state, everyone lives in fear. Not just the people at the bottom. Even the upper echelons are motivated by fear. But not all fear is bad. Fear of pain, fear of loss, fear of death, these keep you alive. But what if you were impervious to pain, or loss, or death? What if you were only an idea? Because a man can fail. He can be killed and forgotten, but an idea can change the world. This is the story of V for Vendetta.
Who is but the form following the function of what, and what I am is a man in a mask.
Well, I can see that.
Of course you can. I'm not questioning your powers of observation. I'm merely remarking upon the paradox of asking a masked man who he is.
And who he is Hugo Weaving, or possibly James Purefoy, who was originally cast and left 6 weeks into shooting either because of the mask or creative differences with the director, or both. The Mask is based on a man named Guy Fawkes, who in the movie's intro informs us tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament in 1605, when Catholics were generally oppressed under the dominant Protestant rule in Britain. A lot of English Catholics had fled the last 15 years of persecution to the continent, with Guy Fawkes being one of them. There he met a hardcore Catholic named Robert Catesby, who designed and financed the gunpowder plot. Catesby brought in Fawkes with the intention of tunneling under the foundations of Westminster Abbey, adjacent to Parliament, and smuggling in several dozen barrels of highly ignitable gunpowder. The idea was to light a slow fuse during the state opening of Parliament, when the assembled crowd would have been the who's who of court society, including the king, queen, their eldest son and heir, the nobles, bishops, and all the other rich assholes that wanted to be seen cozying up next to power. Unfortunately, an anonymous warning gave the plot away, and Fawkes was caught with the hidden barrels of gunpowder, racked for a couple of days in the Tower of London, and finally dropped a dime on his co-conspirators. Those who weren't killed attempting to flee were brought in for a show trial and promptly executed. Every 5th of November, this failure is celebrated by some of the British public, who parade around his effigy and then burn it like a witch in Salem, with fireworks marking the botched revolution. Of course, not everyone over there feels this way, especially if you're Catholic or from Northern Ireland.
I saw once in a pub in the north of Ireland a placard which said, "Guy Fawkes, the only man to enter the Houses of Parliament with honest intentions." We have a very different perspective on Guy Fawkes than English people would have.
The British comic writers of that period were highly politicized, and a lot of that found its way into the narratives they were scrawling. So when Alan Moore began a dystopian, post-apocalyptic, near-future history version of the UK in the 1990s, the Guy Fawkes analogy was readily available and deliberate, with Moore pointing out later that Britain has a history of making heroes out of criminals or people who in other centuries might have been regarded as terrorists. He wanted a similar ambiguity for the lead, appropriating the vibe of Guy Fawkes the Saboteur. However, V was created in the summer, so there were no masks lying around to copy. Artist David Lloyd took the chance to invent one and gave it a smile.
Because the last thing you really expect from somebody who's coming to kill you is that you be smiling.
The whole philosophy behind the story was partly stimulated because of the ultra-conservative Thatcherian government that was imposing quite heavy political rules on everyone. Co-creator David Lloyd said the original plan was for it to be a kind of urban guerrilla, and Alan really wanted something more theatrical. Lloyd wanted to give it a style more like cinema or television to differentiate it from previous comic styles that he associated with kids. To some people's preference, it was originally presented in black and white because it suited the stark, bleak style they wanted. And that was all the publisher could afford. The publisher, a British comic anthology named Warrior, folded after just 26 issues, and the last act of V for Vendetta remained unfinished. However, later in the 80s, the American comic icon DC went across the pond and offered a bunch of the ex-Warrior staff a place to park their neuroses. Talent. By that point, DC was publishing most of Moore's work anyway, so they thought it would be a good time to finish V for Vendetta. They were always aware of the possibility of a cinematic adaptation, and that was part of the deal of selling the rights to DC. According to producer Joel Silver, who was himself the inspiration for Tom Cruise's parody Les Grossman and Ben Stiller's 2008 Hollywood satire Tropic Thunder.
I couldn't have done it without you, Sloan.
Really?
No, of course I could. A nutless monkey could do your job. Wow.
Plus, apparently saw Rubenex, movie producer in the Tarantino Tony Scott classic True Romance.
Better be great, they cost me enough. What'd that day cost me?
$357,000.
Elliot, I swear to God, somebody is stealing from me.
Which I didn't know about until recently, but totally tracks.
Sequel, Body Bags.
Really?
So we don't have a title yet, but what is Joe like?
Body Bags 2.
That's imaginative. Got more taste in my penis.
This guy's really funny.
Anyway, Silver said the Wachowski siblings first adapted the graphic novel into a screenplay in the mid-90s, before they made their 1999 era-defining hit The Matrix, which Silver produced. It was during the back-to-back filming of the second and third Matrix movies, post 9/11, that they decided to pull it out of the drawer and dust it off. Alan Moore's original story was created as a response to Thatcherism, set as a conflict between two opposing ideologies, fascism and anarchism, while the Wachowskis changed the film's subtext to fit a contemporary US political context, liberals versus neocons. But regardless, the final adaptation mixed a political thriller of investigation, revenge, and martyrdom with an orphan's personal journey from traumatized wallflower to badass revolutionary. Director James McTeigue was the first AD on the Matrix films, which means he was the taskmaster on set and was personally offered the promotion by the Wachowskis as a birthday present while filming, with them set to adapt and produce with McTeigue directing. Talk about a dream job offer. Lucky bastard.
I dare do all that may become a man who dares more is none.
Coming from a long tradition of anti-heroes that chose freedom over oppression, going back to Logan's Run, The Omega Man, and Fahrenheit 451, V was an archetype that hadn't been utilized much in recent years. On one hand, he's altruistic and thinks great change can be brought about by the people coming together against a government that has gotten out of control.
There's no certainty, only opportunity.
On the other hand, he has a murderous grudge against the puppet masters and will kill anyone in the way, on the way, to exact revenge. It deals with a character who is an uncompromising terrorist with the expressed purpose of bringing about revolution.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
He's been imprisoned and tortured and abused and then burnt in fire, creating a vengeful angel. He's also a former vaudeville actor and custodian of banned art.
You cannot steal from the censor, I merely reclaimed them.
Much like Stephen Fry's late-night variety show host.
Oh my god. That's God Save the Queen my parents took me to when they hung it at Gallery 12. I thought Sutler had it destroyed.
He believes he did. Cost me more than this house. But no matter how bad I feel, it always cheers me up.
When adapting the source material, the Wachowskis chose to focus much of the narrative on V's relationship with Evie, who of the two leads changed the most in translation from page to screen. In the graphic novel, she's a naive 16-year-old who becomes a pawn in V's schemes, molded by him using time-honored indoctrination techniques with more than a hint of Stockholm Syndrome hazing up the place. Given much more agency in the film, Natalie Portman's Evie's ultimate journey from insecure studio PA to cool hand Luke renegade is really the emotional arc of the film. One that I think more people might go on if under similar circumstances, but that's neither here nor there. Revenge might be sweet, but that's the skeletal backbone propelling the overarching narrative, while Evie's journey is the beating heart.
I never saw them again. It was like those black bags erased them from the face of the earth.
It's in the Shadow Gallery that she sees what V's revolution is all about. It's the art that's missing out in the world, replaced by iconography of the state. It's claimed that when asked if he would cut funding for the arts during World War II, Winston Churchill simply replied, "Then what are we fighting for?"
Oh, revolution without dancing is a revolution not worth having.
By the way, that jukebox has a few hundred songs, personally picked out by the director based on what he thought should be saved, because you get to do that when you're the director. And speaking of pre-production, 89 sets had to be built by production designer Owen Patterson, who the Wachowskis had previously worked with on the Matrix trilogy. Studios in London were tight for time and space, so the team had to look to continental Europe to fill with their interior sets, scouting in Budapest and Prague while finally settling on Berlin. They intended to manufacture an artificial, fascist version of London on the available sound stages, with the centerpiece of the production design being the Shadow Gallery, V's hideout. A Tudor arched space, it could easily exist in real life under the Old Bailey or Westminster. Covered floor to ceiling in the works of art he's caretaking from the censoring clutches of the repressive state, the team used everything from Picasso's to Turner's to modern art comics, even filling a room with banned books that Via salvaged. The one major sequence shot in London was the climactic scene downtown, where after 5 months of planning with 30 different government agencies, they got to close down Trafalgar Square, Parliament Square, and Whitehall for 3 consecutive nights. For the massive demolitions plan, the crew built enormous miniature replicas of the places and things that were set to be blown up, built to a scale that is workable but also realistic, including a 42-foot piece of Parliament, a 20-foot tall model of the Old Bailey, and a 30-foot tall model of Big Ben. These were all built predominantly from plaster so that it would break apart like stone when detonated.
Now that's done with, it's time to have a look at your face. Take off your mask.
No.
To hide how horribly disfigured he is, V wears a vaudevillian mask. But that's tougher to pull off on screen than most people realize without alienating your audience from the character. The mask adds to his moral ambiguity, instantly creating the question, can you trust this character? Can you trust a man in a mask?
Moments such as these are matters of faith.
When V for Vendetta was released, it was to remind people.
To fail is to invite doubt into everything we believe, everything that we have fought for.
What can happen when they relinquish their freedoms to the safekeeping of a powerful few?
Doubt will plunge this country back into chaos, and I will not let that happen.
A powerful few that are uninterested in you personally, only in their own empowerment.
Gentlemen, I want this terrorist found.
Using any tools available.
And I want him to understand what terror really means.
In V for Vendetta, the media is a tool of the state, one that uses misinformation to control the narrative. Right now, in real life, social media, generative AI, all these are being used to gaslight the population into disbelieving everything they see.
Beneath this mask, there is more than flesh.
Civilization is a mile wide and an inch deep.
Beneath this mask, there is an idea, Mr. Creedy.
If you can't trust your senses, what can you trust?
And ideas are bulletproof.
It's really a meditation on what happens when a government pushes people too far. It's a warning, it's a pretty ancient warning about the function of government and its responsibility towards its citizens.
When was the last time you watched this movie? If it's been a while, I suggest you stream it or buy a disc of V for Vendetta, because no one is going to save us but ourselves.
I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot.